There is a time in late winter when the abundance of summer seems to be a distant dream. We grew accustomed to the darkness only because it happened slowly, progressively chipping away at our hopes for sunny days. But there is a harbinger of good news, heralding the arrival of spring that awakens in us the possibility that light is returning, that feasting shall come back. The daffodil. With their trumpet-like center petals, daffodils silently shout through their disruptive exuberance that warmer temperatures in light-filled lazy afternoons are on their scheduled march, due to arrive in time. Since they are one of the first flowers to bloom in the year, their arrival is always a celebration to me. Past us are the long dark nights, the bone-chilling winter snowstorms. Daffodil or narcissus are prolific plants that easily naturalize in shaded gardens, and unlike tulips and other flowering spring bulbs, will not be eaten by deer or groundhogs. For those reasons, I'm trying to grow more of them in my garden, and frankly, I don't know why I have not grown them sooner all these previous years. They also happen to be great early cut flowers. But there is another flower that steals all the attention to itself, but in a much grander scale. You could even call it the queen of the garden, since ultimately it really follows its own will. It rains during the height of the growing season. That is, of course, the majestic sunflower. What excites me a lot about gardening is actually being surprised by the magical growth that happens. And we have here sunflowers that grew by themselves from seed that was thrown in the ground last year. They just chose where they wanted to grow, and they actually chose the best spot. And the best thing is that they know exactly where to grow. These sunflowers, they chose to grow here because this is the place that gets the most sun. Even though they're growing right in the middle of the path, it doesn't matter because they know exactly what they need. For some reason, I think seeds know when to grow and where to grow. And when they grow in the wrong place, they just don't develop. So that's the intelligence of nature. Of course, if you want to see this through a rational scientific view, the reason why volunteer plants appear to be better suited, more robust, and strong-willed plants is due to confirmation bias, since most of the volunteer plants we see growing are precisely the ones that survived because they were in the right place with the right conditions to develop, because we never see the ones that failed in subpar conditions. They don't live too long to tell the story. In any case, there is still a certain synchronicity of factors that cause seeds left in the soil seed bank to germinate when they do. The soil seed bank is nothing more than the reservoir of plant genetic potential in an ecosystem. Soil holds many seeds waiting for the right conditions to grow. That was the case for these sunflowers, since these were nothing more than offspring of the plants I had grown in previous years. I had not sown them this year, yet this year's specimens were showing the most promise. They were growing so fast that they were falling victim to their own success. Their weight were proving too much for their spindly stems. That and the voracious attacks of the groundhog, intent on taking them down. Thankfully, most of them were already too tall for it to inflict much damage. This sunflower here just toppled over. It had been trampled by the groundhog previously, and that kind of weakened its base. So I think yesterday's thunderstorm was the final nail in the coffin. I'll try to prop it up and see if it will actually still live, but once a plant breaks the stem, it usually dies. It hasn't been broken completely, but it's not a good sign. It's just grown too heavy for its own good. Maybe if I tie it to this, then it could survive. Possibility. We'll see. I went on performing back surgery on this gentle giant, hoping it would heal up and still flower. All of the sunflowers had grown by themselves this year, but just because they were a gift, it didn't mean I was not invested in their well-being at this point. This is how they came to be. For 2 years I had grown a mix of varieties that produced several flowers per plant. They had grown and flowered and had dropped their seed to the ground, even as they served as a very welcome source of nutrition to yellow finches and other seed-loving birds. I think these multi-flowering specimens are a better choice to beautify a garden, since they flower for a longer period of time, even if their blooms are smaller in size. The big single-flowered varieties are great, but they are not the best in small gardens in my opinion. Of course, they are usually the ones that produce the seeds that are edible. These multi-flowered ones tend to produce the black oil seeds birds enjoy. Sunflowers are a native flower here, so they fit perfectly as a food source for the wild birds. While having birds flying around the garden feasting is a joyful sight, be prepared to have disheveled sunflowers, whose top petals have been removed, clearing the way for the nutritious seeds. Coming up in the next block, I will share with you what became of these sunflowers. Did they surprise me? Right after this commercial. June gave into July. Clusters of grapes deckled the garden entry as if festooning the path for a parade. The malaise of warm afternoon slowly simmered the sugars within these green globes, creating an elixir of compounds that we would in time recognize as flavor. As summer established its rule over the land, the sunflowers stretched their arms ever upwards as if attempting to reach their namesake king star. I was surprised at their growth this year. One specimen had been astute enough to take hold of the sunniest spot in the ground and grew with furious energy. They were reaching the height of trees. Generally, gardens full of annuals do not have structures that play around with height. They tend to be shorter, hugging the ground, but sunflowers are the exception. They are a great tool to use to create impromptu gardens that awe. But they also work as cut flowers, serving double duty, triple duty if you count how much nectar they put out, and how joyful bees become when they find these discs of abundance. Ouço os hinos desta terra, sonhos longe a ecoar. Vejo os planos de Marina de crescer e estudar. Providing food for pollinators is another great reason to cultivate these plants. But with all the benefits, there was a drawback in hosting these prolific growers, and it had a lot to do with how well they grew once they got going. They start shading things out around them as they grow. As their shade is cast over neighboring plants, they take for themselves the energy to grow, depriving it from others. For that reason, they may not be the most practical choice for small gardens bent on producing lots of other human foods. They will also suck moisture from the ground, making other plants have lesser of a share to hydrate themselves. I could see some of the surrounding crops suffering a bit, but the beauty of the sunflowers had mesmerized me like sirens. I couldn't bear the thought of taking them out now. These plants are native to the Americas, having been domesticated by Native Americans, especially in the region of the Great Plains. The reason for their untrammeled growth could be their native species status, being well adapted to this ecosystem, but they also have another trick up their sleeves, a secret potion to ensure their supremacy in the garden. They have allelopathic compounds that they secrete, making it harder for other plants to grow around them. These chemical compounds inhibit the sprouting of other plants as well as suppress the growth of plants that have sprouted around them already. That is how they keep their hegemony. For that reason, I don't grow too many of them always, but at times I can't resist. As summer ended, their glory faded with each dropping petal and withering leaf. Some of the sunflowers suffered the attacks of groundhogs, but most endured and dropped to the ground, the seeds not gobbled up by the birds. As winter approached, the garden disheveled and jungle-like,
mourn the glory past, but in time all would be made new again.